people coming in, so. All right, shall we? Still some people coming in. All right. Hi, hello everybody. Thank you very much for being here. This is very flattering. I'm Shringi, and I'm a game developer, designer, researcher. So I started off as a game programmer, and then I worked in the games industry for about 10 years as a developer and then as a designer. And for the last 3 years, I'm doing a PhD in games. Yeah, I recommend that. So why I started this is because, like, while making games is super fun, there came a point where we were having a lot of discussions amongst designers where we were like, so this is the message that we want to send in the game, or these are the expressions that we want players to feel. And there was no way to really understand if that is what is happening. So, you know, like in playtests, et cetera, we hear a lot like, oh, we like that. We like to continue playing. But there was a point where I was like, do you get it? Like, am I making sense? But it was very hard to ask that to players. And it was hard to point fingers on why is it working? Why are people playing games? What is it that's happening? And this is when I thought, OK, let's ask these questions from a research perspective. As games have only recently been started studying academically, whereas magic, literature, movies, we know much more of what is happening in those areas. So I thought, OK, let's get in there and see what we can find and what we can learn, and how can we create a creative confluence where one field can actually learn from another and create some examples. So why magic, right? I'm not a magician, but I happened to sit in one of the magic shows, and I was like, so this is what we're doing, right? Both game developers, game designers, and magicians, we're creating illusions. We're creating a world out of nowhere, and we're trying to make sense of all of the objects within that world, within that illusion, and having the spectator or the player on that journey. And looking at these illusions, I actually got quite overwhelmed in the beginning. So there's a lot of techniques of creating visual illusions that can be used in games. And then there's like a lot of logical illusions as to if a magician looks in a certain direction, the audience looks in a certain direction. And that's how we are hardwired as human beings, that if I look here, if I look at you, you look at me. If I look there, probably look there. I'm not a good magician. You probably didn't look there. But that's the psychology behind it, that you look at the coin, everybody looks at the coin. So these were like small things that started making me ask questions, that how can we tangibly use these principles that magicians have actually picked from psychology and transfer them into game design. And let's see through this talk whether I'm able to convince you that you should learn a bit of stage magic. So
awesome.
Yeah, isn't that awesome? So does anybody know how that happened? Guesses? Please. Fake how? Yeah, pretty obvious in this room, isn't it? But I'm having this talk, and that's why you're able to tell what's happening over there. But the idea is not how they did it. The idea is how did they create the relationship between what the magician is doing and what is happening. So here I'm talking about creating causal relationships. So what the magician does over here is creates, first of all, an atmosphere as if they don't really know about technology, like the camera is shaky and the place is kind of, just the way the towels are there, and it just looks very rudimentary. And this main thing that they bring again and again is if you do A, B happens. If you twist the cup in the right direction at the right velocity, it would make the water stand static. It's actually quite simple how we deal with causality on a daily basis, right? If A happens and B follows it, and if it does happen again and again, as human beings, it's quite easy for us to say, yeah, B happened because of A. In this case, the water started twisting because the magician did it. I mean, not for you guys, but for whom it worked. So now if we look at games, what are games doing? All of the objects within the game field are basically pixels. How do we create these relations that the player not only learns them quite automatically, but kind of builds on that world, right? So now that we know that doing A does B, what does doing B does, and the choreography starts from there. Especially when we are designing the initial few segments of the game. So I'm sure a lot of people know this game, Katamari Damacy. So in this game, what happens is that you have a giant ball, not that giant to begin with. You have a ball, and it's quite adhesive. And if the objects around the ball are smaller than the ball, and you keep rotating the ball, it attaches itself to the ball. And as the ball increases, you keep increasing the size of the ball, and that's how the game proceeds. And this whole game is based on this causal relation, which is actually quite absurd from the narrative angle because you're creating stars. But as soon as you enter in the game, the first 2 minutes of the game, you do this A and B so often and so automatically that it becomes like quite obvious to begin with. Now, this is a simple game in terms of mechanics, and it does it well. So very often, very, very often, it is one of the basic things that breaks in mechanical design. So this is one of my favorite games. Actually, I really like Badland. It's a platformer. It was a mobile game. Maybe you guys know about it. It's a platformer in which you're like flying as a clone, and you have these gears and walls that you have to avoid colliding to just go through the level. Now, when I started this game, and I actually play tested with other people as well, because I was curious that is it just me, I collided both with the wall and the gears. And I didn't know which one was it that I was dying because of. So like, there was this break in causal reality. Because it's a simple platformer, it didn't make much of a difference. But again, since I'm a designer, I wanted to test that. Is that a hitch that's happening in the game for a lot of players? So I tested with a few players and realized that in the first beginning of the game, this was a problem that was happening to quite a few players. In this game, it didn't matter. The art was beautiful, and it was a good platformer. But this is a simple example of where you're designing something which is quite obvious in your head, but as a player, the causality kind of breaks. So we'll go a step further into this idea of causality and see how we build on it. That's absolutely brilliant, isn't it? I'm a big fan of Teller. So, so there's a lot to learn from this simple clip. There is showmanship, there is narration, there's a lot of choreography that we can learn as designers as to how to keep you in the journey of problem solving. But let's break it in terms of what we learned about causality and what is happening over here. So in the beginning, as a spectator, you're like, Teller can take coins out of thin air. So you're following that. The magician can take coins out of thin air. So A is following B. Now, while you're starting to guess how this is happening, when the spectator gets up to speed with the magician, just before that, just one step ahead, he starts taking it out of the clothes and then out of the specs. So this changing the tempo. As you can notice, the B is not changing, it's A. If A changes, it's going to create a kind of disassociation. But here we are changing what is happening with, sorry, I said that the other way around. So we're changing A while B remains the same. So you're creating, like, just when you're trying to understand what the problem is, you're creating a new angle to it. None of it is breaking that he cannot take it out of the thin air anymore. It's adding up on it, right? And also there's this humor and the pauses that are helping. So we're changing the same equation, but looking at it from a different angle again and again. And finally, for I call it the boss fight, or the final attention of the piece is the fishes. So there's some sort of a reveal or some sort of a finality to the piece where you're feeling the satisfaction of the journey that has happened. So I'm going to give you an example which is not 100% mapping, but bear with me. So this is Limbo. Most of you know about Limbo. So you're on this journey of wanting to save a sister, and you're going through this platformer. The first time you meet this trap as an object, all you know is that you have to jump over this trap. Otherwise, if you fall into the trap closes and you're dead. The functionality of the trap over here is the trap closes when an object collides with the trap. Now, as you move forward, not much longer than much away from the sequence that you've just learned about the trap still is used to close an object, to trap an object, but the next time you need to use it, it has to be the rope. So there's a rope that is hanging, and it'll act as a lever. So the moment you need to activate the trap by introducing the object, which is not you, otherwise you'll die, but the trap functions the way it is designed to function in the first place. So we are taking objects, we are defining what it does, we are creating the collision as the causality, that if you collide with this, this happens, but you're using it differently. And you're creating puzzles in the mind of the player that they know how it functions, and now you're thinking just one step ahead of how it can be used for the future puzzles, and so on and so forth. The game is quite hard for me, actually, but it works. Now, I'm going to change from this rather vague idea of causality to a more tangible idea of how to create illusion of choice in games. This is a more core part of my research. And I did a study with quite some players to figure out what is it on a moment-to-moment basis that's keeping players wanting to go on. And uncertainty turned out to be one of the biggest things that people care about, whether it's outcome uncertainty, what's going to happen next, whether it's player uncertainty, how am I going to deal with it. But one of the strongest things is decision uncertainty. What should I do? Should I jump? Should I run? Or it's actual narrative decisions. And for decisions, something that's important is choices. We know that choices are important in games. Sid Meier has made it abundantly clear again and again in all of his talks. So now how do we create choices? Because creating choices means that creating an elaborate world where there's like endless branching, not possible, or possible with a lot of production and time. So my work is around creating illusion of choices, studying it from magic, because just like games, most of these magic tricks are completely scripted. So if somebody's saying, pick a card, any card, it is not any card. You're picking the card which is being forced on you. If it is any card, it's being dynamically changed. So how can we use these tricks or understand these psychological methodologies to design more carefully? So let's start with something here. So identical choice is something that is quite basic, and magicians use this a lot. So there'll be a deck of cards, and a magician would say, pick a card, any card. You would genuinely pick any card, and the magician would say, is this 4 of clubs? And you would say yes, and you'll both be very happy. What is happening underneath is that all of the cards were 4 of clubs. And that's like just a magic set of 4 of clubs card. But as a spectator, you're not expecting that when somebody's coming to your bar and saying, pick a card, any card, that, oh, he has a trick card set. That's not what's happening. So coming to games, so imagine you have a reward or a loot or that kind of system, and you have 2 boxes. They're identical boxes. And you have you already have decided that what's going to be behind the box is, I'm going to say a teddy bear for some reason. So it's a teddy bear. But you have 2 boxes, and you have an animation running into both the boxes, and one of it is a butterfly, and one of it is a teddy bear. But what's behind it is still a teddy bear. So you're creating an illusion that the deck is actually real, whereas the path, the script where the game would go next, no matter which box you pick, would be a teddy bear. So that's quite common, and games do that already, but not all, and not as well as magicians do, because there's a narrative to it. So we do have boxes where we have the same thing behind, but the narrative that the magician puts around it, that, hey, pick a card, any card, and the way it's done, that obviously it's a card of 52 different cards, card set of 52 different cards. And that is where we need to put more attention, that how do we make the player think that, of course, it is a different set of doors, or different set of keys, or different set of boxes. It's not the same thing. So that's the attention to detail over there. Stereotypical choice patterns. So I learned something which I didn't know, is that I knew that human beings have certain tendencies, but I didn't know how strong they are. So if there are a set of 4 cards, and you're asked to pick a card on the table, 65% or more of the time, you'll pick the 3rd card from left. This is a thing that we do, apparently. And I mean, I was thinking about it in games terms. When I have made games, I've not thought that, oh, people are going to pick the 3rd choice always. But often it has happened that there's one choice which is getting, if you look at the data, getting more spikes. And I'm like, but I put enough effort in all of those branches, and people are mostly going through this. So this is something to know. Either you need to have a random change in branches or stuff like that, so that these kind of stereotypical choices are not limiting your game design world that you've created. Another example is that in a room full of people, there are certain things that a magician does which I don't have the time to do, and then you ask that pick any name card or pick a card. The chances of you picking an ace or a queen is much, much higher than picking any other card. So these are a lot of stereotypical choices that we're making. In terms of UI, for example, so if there's a dinner table, and no matter what your preference, or not in terms of health preferences, but in taste preferences, no matter what your taste preferences are, based on how a table is laid, what you will pick in your dinner plate is different. So that's a stereotypical choice that we follow. So if that is what is happening, and we have these complicated UIs in the game, and people are following some sort of patterns which psychologists and magicians have figured out, then we are sort of, at least I was not, I don't know about you, we're not sort of using this to maximum, this knowledge that already exists to our maximum optimization of our game design process. It is part of my paper, and you can talk to me that I can send you these links so that you can read about them if that's interesting to you. So that's just an image of saying that people pick 3rd from left. This one is actually something that I find super exciting. So a riffle force is when a magician takes a card set, and I don't know how to do it with the mic, but does a riffle, and then asks you pick a card. And in the riffle force, they're making one card stay a few seconds longer than the other. So it's a visual saliency. There's a visual saliency on one of the cards. And 98%, I'm going to sound like a sales person, but 98% of the times, people pick that card which was visually salient. Like, I don't know. I was mind blown when I looked at this study. Because if that is what is happening, once again, then in an array of many game design decisions, can we use audio and visual saliencies to direct attention? For example, this is a simple example. Like, especially gacha games or games which have like CCGs and like games which have a lot of UI. And we as designers know that what is a good unit for the player to pick next for them to have a good game. So just creating like slightly bigger icons on those ones, or creating some kind of visual, not highlights. So visual saliency is not literal highlights. So like I said, it's quite subtle. Because a literal highlight can work in the opposite way. So it has to be fairly subtle for a visual saliency to work. So it feels like, yeah, of course it's a free choice, right? So can we create this? Is this usable? So I'm still testing it, and the preliminary results are yes. There is also, like, for example, if it's a racing game or something, right? And you have like 2 branches going on. I mean, this is already done. Like, just using a light source on one of them, but like lighting can be more obvious. So what if one of the branches just had a big billboard, which seems quite part of the environment? Does that create an attention towards one of the branches that we've created? So there are many examples, and we can talk about it if you're interested after the talk, that how saliency can be used in stats, in system design, in platform design, in racing games, in UI, and when not to overdo it. OK, so wait, let me just, sorry. Equivocation, or magician's choice, is when you have when you have a bunch of physically different choices that the player can see. So it's not like identical choice where there are boxes or doors. They're actually stuff that you can see. And the choice is genuinely free. You can actually freely pick any of the options, but the magician changes the meaning of the choice dynamically. So what I mean is, for example, you have the pie and the coffee and the cake over here, and a magician says, touch any one of them, and you touch the coffee cup. So it's up to the magician now whether they will put the coffee cup like in front of you, as if that's your choice, or take it away. Because the phrasing was not pick, it was touch. So all of the ambiguity of how you can translate the branches is in the phrasing beforehand. Does that make somewhat sense? Yeah. So games are doing this. Games are using equivoke, but not the art of phrasing in a way that it doesn't become obvious. So that is the key. So we do create branches that no matter what you do, you go to the same place. But what we don't do as much is create the ambiguity beforehand in simple phrasing. Like I've seen, I don't know how many videos, and every magician does it differently, and every time it's a surprise to me, even if I know this technique so well. So it's basically working really hard on phrasing your problem quite unique to that branch so that it doesn't become obvious when you're going to the next step. So in one of the studies, what I'm doing is that I'm checking the replayability of this. So the idea is that even if you do it a couple of times, it's still not obvious. So we did a small study with a card game, actually, where we asked players to do it again and again, or spectators to do it again and again. And it's done so quickly, and it's done with such ambiguity that every time, whether you put the coffee cup front or back, it's not that noticeable. And part of the art is that to use it in sort of not the most impactful choices. So if the player is already going like, I really need to go through that, so when that choice comes, I will do that. Like, it's not clever to put an equivoke over there. But in the more subtle choices where it doesn't matter as much, you can create a lot of illusion of choice with an equivoke. So here is a small example. So we created a small narrative game. It's called Osaka. It's an academic game, so it's not like, wow, what a great game. It's a game to test the system. So in that game, it's a narration of you're in Osaka with your friend. You're a traveler. You don't know the language. And you're in Osaka, and this friend of yours who is going to take you around Japan has dished you. So you meet her in the hotel room. And so she does come to meet you at the hotel room, but she's dished you from allowing you to stay at her place and dished you from taking you around Japan. So you're kind of pissed with her. Anyhow, she's at the hotel with you right now to have dinner, and you're happy that at least there is somebody, and you're not clueless. And at that point, what happens is that you hear a lot of noises outside, and you yourself don't know what these noises mean because you don't understand the language, you don't understand the culture. And she kind of seems like she gets it. So I'm narrating the game. There's a lot of choices between this, but I'm coming to the point where we have applied the equivoke. So she kind of gets it, and you can see it in the way she's behaving, that she understands what happens. So you try to ask her, and she's like, gosh, we need to hurry. Which way? And then it's the front door and window, or no matter what you take, she takes the front door and you go through the window. And this is a game we developed to check the impact of an equivoke. So what we're checking is, do people still feel the decision uncertainty when the decisions are fake? And do they still feel that they made an impactful decision, even if, literally it's not what they actually picked? And again, I'm still looking at the stats. I just finished data collection a few weeks back, and it's actually quite strong. It's obvious that it's better than no choice, and it's obvious that it's fine even if you take the other choice, which was not the choice you meant, as long as the phrasing of before and after is ambiguous enough for you to go along with it. So that's quite literal in a narrative game, but you can also use it as resources. So you have a game where, say, you have a resource like karma, for example. You don't say what karma means, but as a player, you're collecting this resource. So as a designer, you can dynamically change the meaning of karma the way you like in terms of how the script should go on. So yeah, these are vague examples, but what I'm trying to say is that the art is in the way they're doing it. What designers or what magicians or what poets or what people who are writing books, we're all doing quite similar things. And the psychological principles of all of these are quite similar, but how we are doing them and where the art lies is different. So there's a lot of value in just looking at it closely and seeing what you can pick. So here I've just given some random examples of what you can pick. Maybe none of these are of use or interest to you right now, but I'm saying that there is a lot there, and you'll have to take my word based on this presentation that there's a lot to be seen in other fields other than games to kind of take all the knowledge they have collected from a creative standpoint. So that is me, and I would end this presentation saying any sufficiently advanced technology is not so far away from magic, so let's look at magic. Thank you very much. And that's my email. Thank you. I don't know if there's time for questions. Is there? A few? OK. If anybody has questions, yes, please.
How do you think game literacy is going to change about the topics that you talk about, basically establishing trust with the player and having all these tricks that maybe that in the future when people are more literate in games and know what's happening, they will see right through?
Mm-hmm. I would kind of agree and disagree over there. So we know a lot of, a lot of magicians, especially Penn and Teller, for example, they tell you a lot about magic while they're doing the magic. So there is certain amount of integrity in sort of being front up about it. So I think it's up to designers how they kind of say it out loud what they're doing and still do it. So there's something called inattentional inattentional blindness and stuff, which is psychological terms, no time to go through it. But the idea is that even if we know about these tricks and techniques, how the mind works, the mind still works like that. We're still blind to it. So I would say that, yeah, right now we are at a place where we are not at all making it transparent. I actually think that making it transparent might add a lot of value to it, and you can be quite tongue-in-cheek about it, to be honest. So let's see how we use it. I'm trying in a few ways, and maybe you should too, and we can exchange.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else?
So you talked about patterns. So people read about from the left to the right and something. And I was wondering, with other language, which are reading from right to left, is it different or is it the same patterns?
So these stereotypical patterns are mostly tested on the Western audience, especially the one with the third from left. But the stereotypical pattern of food, where you lay the food in any order, is cross boundaries. So the third from left pattern, I'm not sure if it's the same for different cultures, but the food laying on the table is similar. So it tells us that there are stereotypical patterns, and some of them are documented. I can send you the documents, and you're right. The left to right one might be a Western audience thing. You're welcome. Anybody else? I think we're out of time anyways, right? All right, thank you very much. That was great.